The Diocese of Paisley podcast speaks today to Anthony Horan, Director of the Scottish Catholic Parliamentary Office, which engages with both the Scottish and UK parliaments and governments on behalf of the Bishops' Conference of Scotland. Anthony, thank you for agreeing to speak to the Diocese of Paisley podcast today. For those who might not know you, could you tell us a bit about yourself and how you came to lead the Scottish Catholic Parliamentary Office?
Well, thanks, Yvonne, and it's a delight to be here on the Diocese of Paisley podcast and to speak to you about the work of the Catholic Parliamentary Office. So I live in Cumbernauld with my wife and 4 children, and I am a lawyer by training. I worked in criminal law and in corporate law for Glasgow City Council for a number of years. I've always been quite active in my faith, and this opportunity came along in 2016 to become director of the Catholic Parliamentary Office, and so I went for it, and I was blessed to be given the opportunity to work for the Bishops of Scotland. It's, as you say, I work on behalf of the Catholic bishops, and that really involves engaging in politics for the Church in Scotland, making sure the Church's voice is heard in politics, both in the UK Parliament, with the UK Parliament and Government, and also the Scottish Parliament and governments. I think it's important that the Church has a voice in the political sphere. Of course, we know the Church isn't a political body, but it does have something to offer, and I think that's really, really important.
What does a typical day look like for you in this role, or is there no such thing as a typical day?
Yeah, you beat me to it. There is no such thing as a typical day. It varies all the time. For example, I'm here speaking to you today and doing a podcast. Tomorrow I'll be at the Caritas Awards. And yesterday I was at school talking to about 80 to around 80 teachers about equality, diversity and inclusion, law and policy. And so it just varies all the time. Next week I've got a couple of meetings with MSPs to discuss assisted suicide. So it just changes all the time, and I think that's something that I find quite appealing, is that the work is so varied and very, very interesting. So yeah, there is no such thing as a typical day. It changes all the time, and I think that's something that I very much enjoy.
I'm getting a sense that you work at the point where faith meets politics. What does it mean to represent the Church in the world of politics and public policy in Scotland today?
Well, first of all, it's an honour to do this job because whilst I never ever envisaged working in the political sphere, I've come to really enjoy it, and I think the reason I enjoy it so much is because, as you allude to, I'm doing it from a faith perspective, and I think that's something that I find great comfort in and get strength from, is that I'm coming at it from the faith perspective with the Church's teaching, and so you can't go wrong, and I think we need to bring Church teaching into the political realm. Because, as I said a moment ago, the Church has something to offer politics. It's not a political body. It's not trying to force anyone down any particular political road, but we just have something to offer, and particularly in relation to trying to focus minds on the dignity of the human person, of every human person, from conception until natural death and everything in between, and just to work for the common good. And I think those are kind of key principles that I always try to keep in mind as I navigate that kind of space between faith and politics. And I think that's really, really important to do that.
We've had 3 First Ministers in Scotland over the past 2 years. How is it dealing with different personalities with different faith perspectives?
Very interesting, because they are, they are different characters, all three First Ministers, Nicola Sturgeon, Humza Yousaf and now John Swinney. But I think what I've set out to do, certainly since I came into this role in 2016, and it's taken time, but it's to try and normalise the presence of the church in and around politics. Again, I caveat that by saying, the church isn't a political body, but the church still has something to offer, and I think it's important that we normalise the church, especially the bishops, being in and around politicians and being in and around the institutions of Parliament and government. And so that's something that we've tried to do, and that's, as each First Minister, through each of the last three First Ministers, that's gradually increased. And that's not necessarily a reflection on the First Minister and their openness to the church. I think it's just the way it's worked out. So, for example, with John Swinney, over the last year or so, he's invited the bishops round to Bute House to meet with them, to have lunch with them, to discuss issues of interest. And he's had meetings with the president of the Bishops' Conference of Scotland. And I think that's really, really important. Other things that we've tried to do is we've established an annual Mass in the Scottish Parliament each June. And we've also established a regular visit to Westminster for the Bishops of Scotland. I think it's important just so that the bishops have the ear of government and Parliament in both a UK and a Scottish setting. And because, as I say, they have something to offer. The church has something to offer. It's not trying to force anything in anyone. We're just trying to focus minds on the importance of human dignity and to try and get everyone together to work for the common good of all.
Would you say that Christians are represented well in the political landscape, or because Christians can be an easy target, that those in public office may still be inclined to keep their faith views private?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think Christianity is represented to a point in politics across the UK, but I think there have been some worrying developments over the last few years. So if we think back a couple of years ago, when Kate Forbes was nominated or put forward as a candidate to become First Minister. Now, there was a lot of media scrutiny of Kate Forbes, in particular on her, with regard to her views on abortion, and also her views on same-sex marriage. I think at the time she was involved in the contest with Humza Yousaf and Ash Regan to become the leader of the SNP. I think she was asked, you weren't a parliamentarian at the time that the Parliament voted on same-sex marriage, but what would you have voted? And she said that she wouldn't have voted in favour of same-sex marriage, and of course that brought all sorts of criticism in the mainstream media, and so that was. And I think a lot of her SNP colleagues who had initially backed her to be the new SNP leader then withdrew their support, which I found quite worrying and quite unsettling because I think while she said she would have voted against same-sex marriage, she didn't suggest for 1 minute that she would seek to overturn the law or anything like that. So I think that suggests that we're not quite there in terms of Christian values and beliefs kind of being accepted in the mainstream political sphere. But it was interesting because, of course, Kate Forbes was easily the most popular candidate amongst the general public in Scotland, even if she wasn't the preferred candidate of the SNP members who voted Humza Yousaf to become the SNP leader at the time, albeit it was quite marginal. But there's other little instances as well. You look at the treatment of Tim Farron a few years ago, when he was the Lib Dem leader. There was I think Charlie Faulkner as well, Lord Charlie Faulkner, who criticised Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, for invoking her Muslim beliefs when she said that she would oppose assisted suicide. He suggested that she shouldn't be forcing her beliefs on anyone. Well, she wasn't. She was just saying that that was her beliefs, and that's why that underpinned her opposition to assisted suicide. So, I'm not quite sure that we're in a good place in terms of Christian politicians being able to be open about their Christian beliefs, or just people of religious faith generally. But I think it's important that politicians don't sort of cower away from that. I think they do need to be open about their beliefs. Otherwise, those who seek to silence religion in politics will win, and that's not fair. Religion has a place in politics, in as much as it helps to form the values and belief systems of people, and that's no different to any other kind of aspect of life. So Christians and people of other faiths need to have a voice, and that's really, really important. And people of faith who work in politics shouldn't be afraid to refer to their religious beliefs and values and to talk about them openly, because it's an important part of life.
Our politicians are debating and voting on some of the biggest moral and social issues of our times, of all time. I'm talking about assisted suicide. Where are we in the debate around assisted suicide, both at a Scottish and a UK level?
Yes, well, it's very interesting times on this particular topic because, as you say, we have a bill in the UK Parliament which would apply to England and Wales, and we also have a bill in the Scottish Parliament which, of course, would apply to Scotland. As we record this, there are big votes coming up, particularly Westminster. Westminster's first in terms of the next vote on assisted suicide. And you may recall that in November 2024, the UK Parliament voted in favour of the general principles of the Kim Leadbeater's assisted suicide bill. And since then, there has been a committee scrutiny and various amendments have been put forward. Many reasonable amendments have been put forward and rejected. For example, a proposed amendment to ensure that people with Down syndrome couldn't access assisted suicide purely because of Down syndrome. The same with people with eating disorders such as anorexia. And then there was a very reasonable amendment that an individual who is considering an assisted suicide should have a consultation with a palliative care professional or expert. And all of those kind of reasonable amendments were rejected. And so what's happened is that a lot of the MPs who had initially voted in favour of the bill, and it was a majority of 55 in November, a lot of them are now saying that they will not vote in favour of it at the third reading stage, which will happen later this month. Whether or not that will be enough to overturn the initial majority from the second reading in November, we're not sure, but certainly the direction of travel is that there are more and more concerns about this, and I think that's certainly coming through as we hear more and more MPs who voted in favour are now suggesting they're going to vote against. In Scotland, timetable's a little bit different. So we just last month had the first vote on the general principles of Liam MacArthur's bill, and it was 70 to 56 in favour of the general principles. Now, I must admit, I was surprised that the majority was as big as that. I mean, I know it's only 14, but I thought it was going to be a little bit tighter. But I think what we did see during the debate on the Liam MacArthur's bill was a lot of MSPs saying that they still had concerns, some quite significant concerns, particularly around coercion of vulnerable people, and the possibility for expansion of the law, as we've seen in places like Canada and the Netherlands and Belgium. But they said, but we'd like to continue the conversation for a little bit longer. So they voted essentially to continue the conversation. Not ideal, because I don't think even the principle of assisted suicide is a good thing and is a road that society should be going down. But at least it still gives us an opportunity to have that conversation. And I'm convinced that the more conversations we have and the more debate and discussion we have around this issue, politicians will come to see that this is not a road that we should go down. And so I think that they will ultimately change their minds, and certainly we'll be working hard to persuade MSPs and MPs to change their minds and vote against assisted suicide.
I think assisted suicide also undermines other areas such as palliative care. In 2016, my husband was diagnosed with incurable non-smoking lung cancer. His prognosis was 3 months. So he would have fallen into the time frame for what's being proposed for assisted suicide of 6 months. But with amazing medics, new drugs, the love of family and friends, and the power of prayer, he believed in the power of prayer. We were blessed with 4 years of making precious memories for what were, our children. They were young teenagers at the time. And so if assisted suicide seems like the best or only way forward for some people, surely we need a massive investment of time, resources and money into palliative care, and to look again at prognosis before we move forward with assisted suicide.
Yeah, absolutely, Yvonne. And I don't think you're alone. You and your family are alone in that. I think there's many cases where that precisely that has happened, where people have been given a shorter time than they end up having, and as you say, precious memories are made. And I think this gets to the root of, first of all, palliative care. You're absolutely right. I think we need to invest in palliative care. Palliative care in the UK, when it is provided, is, I think, the best in the world. But the problem is getting it to everyone. And I think that's the issue. So we need to absolutely look at that. But I think that we get to the root of it, and when we talk about people like your husband, and this idea that the proponents of assisted suicide will kind of peddle is that you need the option of assisted suicide to uphold human dignity, and that somehow that is a dignified death, more so than any other kind of death, and I don't think that's right. Assisted suicide doesn't have a stranglehold over human dignity at the end of life. We need to. I think we need to be providing people with better palliative care, recognising their struggles at the end of life, and meeting every kind of need that they have at that time. But I don't think giving the state the power to facilitate death is a good road to go down. And that's notwithstanding all the other arguments. I think that really gets to the root of it. Is it dignified for the state to have that power and to give doctors that power? I don't think it is. So absolutely, as you suggest, I think we should be looking at palliative care, putting more resources into that, to help people at the end of life, to help people make as many good memories as they can. And I think that's where the dignity is. It's not in giving people a lethal concoction of drugs to take their own life.
How should we as Catholics be approaching these major milestones in the parliamentary processes? Obviously through prayer. But how can we be more aware, engaged with, or respond to current issues? And you can include in that the anti-abortion campaign. Often the Church's voice isn't popular or welcomed.
Yes, well, as you say, prayer is important. It is the most important thing. It's a bit of a cliche in Catholic circles, but it's a cliche for a reason because it's absolutely crucial, and that's the first thing that we should do. And we should pray about these issues, and we should pray for our parliamentarians as well that they will, come to the right decision. And I think it's really really important that people do engage with politics on the issues. I think there's a danger in politics nowadays. It's very, very tribal, and it's always kind of, it's, it depends on, it's all about parties. You're SNP or you're Labour or you're Conservative or you're Reform or Lib Dem, Green or whatever. I think as Catholics, I think that what the Church tries to do is maybe encourage people to think a bit more about these individual issues. And I think, we have a Scottish Parliament election next year, and certainly I would personally urge people to approach that election thinking about the issues. I did that at the last Scottish Parliament election. I had a number of candidates that I contacted. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to get candidates' details ahead of an election, but you can get some of them. And so the ones that I did get, I contacted them, and there were two main issues in my mind at the time. One was assisted suicide, because I knew it was coming down the road. And the other was decriminalisation of abortion as well, because again, I knew that was coming down the road. Those were the two issues I wanted to just focus on and put my candidates on the spot about. And, I got a couple of replies back, and one candidate said quite clearly that they were opposed to abortion and they were opposed to assisted suicide, and more importantly, they would vote against any proposal to legalise assisted suicide. And so I decided to vote for that candidate. I didn't care what party they were with. I just wanted to vote for a candidate that, on the most important issue at the time, I knew that they would vote in accordance with, how, with the Church's teaching. And so, whilst that candidate didn't win, they were voted in on the list system, and I'm pleased to say that last month they voted against assisted suicide. And that's really how that's how it needs to work as Catholics. We need to try and approach candidates and politics on the issues. Now, and that's not to say that being a member of a political party isn't useful. I think it is. And I think there's many Catholics out there who are members of political parties, and hopefully within political parties that they're trying to bring, Catholic teaching into how they engage in that party. But I think when it comes to election time, that we do need to try and focus on the issues. And I think that would be my main appeal to Catholics today, is focus on the issues when it comes to elections and when it comes to political engagement, because that's where we can bring the Catholic, the Church's teaching into the political realm and make a difference for the good.
Focusing on young people for a minute who often feel that the Church somehow isn't relevant in our secular world, and they often feel nervous about speaking out as a person of faith. How can they best equip themselves to get involved in defending the faith and speaking out about moral and social concerns in the public square?
Yeah, well, very good question. And do you know, it's interesting because I see a new hunger among young people today. In recent times, that they want to learn more about their faith, and I think that I think we need to try and capitalise on that, and I think we should give young people, I talked about the issues a moment ago. Young people are very interested in the issues, and we talk about, for example, young people have been very motivated and energised about, the climate crisis in recent years and tackling poverty, and they are motivated about that. We also see a lot of young people motivated about beginning of life issues such as abortion as well. So, there are people out there that are energised, and I would appeal to them to try and think about how you can best bring your youthful energy, and your love for the church to do good in the world. And that could be thinking about getting into politics. You could be getting into politics, you get into the arts, you could get into the legal profession, any of these kind of areas. We need faithful, vibrant, energetic young Catholics in there, and I think they're out there. And to be fair, I work with the bishops a lot, and I can see the bishops trying to engage with young people. I can see a lot of young priests coming through in Scotland who are doing fabulous work across the country and trying to harness that energy of the youth. And so I think that just on that point, I understand that across Europe, that the numbers of people attending church is going up, and that's a new trend. But apparently, it's mostly 18 to 24 or 18 to 30-year-old men who are coming into the church, and I think they're just looking for meaning, and looking for to try and contribute to society. And I think this is, they see the church as a guide to that, and they see the church as being an important part of that. And so I think we need to harness that. As I say, I think we're seeing young priests and initiatives across Scotland that are within the church that are trying to harness that. And I think there are real shoots of hope for the church in Scotland with regard to the youth. And so there's a tendency amongst us here in Scotland, Catholics, maybe Catholics generally across Europe, to be a bit downbeat. But I would say, think again, because there are real shoots of hope, and I think we have a strong, energetic youth element there, and I think they're going to carry us forward.
What's your hope, Anthony, for the Scottish Catholic Parliamentary Office over the next few years?
Well, I would like to see us, as I said earlier, we want to try and normalise the presence of the church in and around politics. But what I would really like to see, and I think we're doing that and we'll continue that work, but what I would really like to see, and I touched on it earlier, is us trying to encourage Catholics to focus on really important issues. As I say, not necessarily to remove themselves entirely from party politics, because that's not entirely possible, certainly for a lot of people. But I would like us to try and focus on the issues and to be consistent across the issues, whether it's poverty, whether it's the climate, whether it's abortion, assisted suicide, nuclear disarmament, or Catholic education. All of these issues, I'd love to see Catholics being consistent across all of those issues, so that we are one voice, that there isn't any, fragmentation of the Catholic voice, that we're all speaking or singing from the same hymn sheet, and that will make us stronger, and that will give us a better opportunity to bring about change for the good.
You've maybe just answered my final question, but if you could encourage Catholics in the Diocese of Paisley to pray for one specific intention related to your work, what would it be?
Oh, wow, okay. Put me on the spot with that one. I think, yes, I think you're right, but I maybe just touched on it. I really would ask, I think I would ask for prayers for our parliamentarians, and for young people maybe who are thinking about getting into politics. And particularly those who are Catholic, that they will be true to their faith, and that they won't be afraid to speak openly about their faith, and that they'll be able to learn to be able to present it in a way that isn't threatening, that isn't trying to force other people to believe in it necessarily, but is trying to just focus minds on the importance of human dignity from the moment of conception until natural death, and also with a focus on working for the common good. And that's the common good of all people. It's not individual or groups, it's of all people.
Anthony, thank you for speaking to the Diocese of Paisley podcast.
Thank you, thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Diocese of Paisley podcast. Please like and leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts.